is the best possible development thing. So, with the nuclear cooperation, we want to cement that with the Western powers. And one of the countries which has been phenomenal is France.
Partnership
India's
has also emerged partly as a reaction to disruption in the transatlantic relations under the Trump administration and partly from independent strategic convention on either side, right?
Welcome to the first episode of our podcast in collaboration with Geostrata. Today, we begin from a crisis that has brought energy security, nuclear politics, and geopolitical instability back to the center of international debate: the US-Iran war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. In recent days, the United States and Iran have reportedly reached an initial memorandum of understanding aimed at ending military operation and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategic energy choke points. Around one-fifth of global oil and natural gas shipments normally pass through this narrow passage, connecting the Gulf to global markets. Its closure has shown once again how vulnerable the international energy system remains to regional crises, especially in the Middle East. Even if diplomacy succeeds in reducing tensions, the consequences of this crisis go far beyond the immediate military dimension. The disruption of oil and gas flows has affected global prices, shipping routes, insurance costs, inflation, and the economic stability of energy importing countries. Asian economics, in particular, have been strongly exposed, but the shock has been felt globally. This is where the crisis becomes directly relevant to our broader discussion. Energy security is no longer only about securing access to fossil fuels, but also about reducing dependency, diversifying supply, strengthening resilience, and accelerating the transition towards low carbon sources of energy. In this context, the key question is not only how countries respond to immediate disruption, but how they reduce their vulnerability to future crises. This is where the debate on nuclear energy becomes particularly relevant. As governments rethink the relationship between energy, security, and geopolitical risk, nuclear cooperation is increasingly emerging as a strategic issue rather than a purely technical or economic one. Of course, nuclear power is not an immediate answer to an oil blockade or a short-term supply shock. Nuclear plants cannot be built overnight. But crises like this shows why nuclear energy is being reconsidered by many countries as part of a long-term strategy for energy security and decarbonization. Alongside renewables, batteries, and energy efficiency, nuclear power is increasingly framed as a way to provide stable, low-carbon energy while reducing exposure to external geopolitical shocks. This brings us to India and Europe. India is one of the most important cases to watch. Its energy demand is growing rapidly, its economy is expanding, and its dependence on imported fossil fuels remain a major strategic vulnerability. At the same time, India has ambitious plans to expand its nuclear capacity in the coming decades, linking nuclear energy to energy security, climate policy, and industrial development. Europe, too, is rethinking the role of nuclear energy in a more unstable geopolitical environment. The energy crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine already forced European countries to reconsider the risk of dependency. Now, the crisis around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz reinforces the same lesson. Energy policy is also security policy. In this episode, we will look at how nuclear cooperation is becoming an increasingly important dimension of India's relation with Western partners. We will focus especially on the European Union and France. So, to begin with, Gaurav, why has nuclear cooperation become such an important dimension of India's relation with Western partners today?
Thank you, Aysenur. Thank you for inviting me for the podcast. A brief introduction before I answer the question. I would like to thank Geostrata for doing this and having me on board for the same. And I'm Gaurav. I am a nuclear engineer turned public policy professional and one of the key members of Indian Youth Nuclear Society. Uh, Also, their government relations and industry partnerships, key industry partnerships key representative. So, Coming to the question, why has nuclear cooperation become such an important dimension of India's relations with Western partners today? Is because India is growing rapidly. Like we are seeing the changes every day. There is a sudden churn in the Indian energy space as such. Why? Because we are a young nation, we are a growing nation. Also, we are one of the countries which have the lowest per capita income throughout in the world. So our average per capita is around 3,000, where Aysenur is sitting, it is around $50,000 per annum. So that leaps for its population, considering it is also one of the youngest populations in the world. Nuclear cooperation helps cements the base for overall energy security in India. So its relations is with the Western partners is not only important for the our energy security, but also our energy sovereignty also. And India's path to nuclear began as soon as it became independent. However, we have been a slow paced nation on that. With we've lost out on a decade also for the expansion of nuclear energy. The nuclear power contribution right now in our overall energy metrics is around 2 to 3%. Our honorable prime minister has said that it will be increased to 100 gigawatts by 2050. It will again be around 4 to 5%. So we punch way below the weight in terms of the energy contribution of nuclear power. India's nuclear cooperation with the West stems from the fact that West has been on the decision-making seats throughout, considering nuclear energy, be it the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the NSG grouping, Nuclear Suppliers Group grouping. Apart from it, the initial tech came from West to India. Like we can see that PSWRs, the heavy reactors. So it was India UK cooperation sometimes, Indo Russia cooperation sometimes that helped us cement our nuclear energy and nuclear security space. We want to continue that. We are continuing that and we are increasing that cooperation each day with recent strategic partnerships signed with global Western superpowers. But again, a single crisis at Hormuz has given up impetus to both the parties in the West also and in the South Asian region where India sits also. So there is immense importance of a nuclear cooperation. However, there is also an immense cooperation for India's hesitations of history, which have been that all these decision-making seats for nuclear cooperation have been with the West. So we need to find a way out to maneuver this partnership, which can help the 1/6 of humanity, also the most populous nation in the world, and apart from it, one of the growing economies also. So a stable electricity supply is the best possible development thing. So with the nuclear cooperation, we want to cement that with the Western powers. And one of the countries which has been phenomenal is France. India's relations with France have been good. We have also seen that how United Kingdom and I think Rolls-Royce was also interested in setting up few reactors in India, considering there is talks for SMRs, MMRs, AMRs, which we want to intend. Also, Italy, which doesn't have nuclear power plants, I don't, but still have one of the best workforce in the nuclear space also. So we miss out on this P2P cooperation usually when we see the nuclear cooperation between India and West. So we only think about G2G or strategic, or we give all these names, but we miss out the people dimension of the relations as well. So it's important for the people, it's important for the economy, it's important for the growing nation that we have. And it is also important if India intends to bring the population, which is now at the per capita of $3,000 to at least $30,000. So that way we will be adding one more zero post the 10 gigawatt currently the capacity which we have.
Thank you so
Digvijay, you
much,
want to add? Yeah, thank you.
Gaurav, for your response. You mentioned France, which is like the most important starting point in India's nuclear cooperation with Europe. Indeed, over the last the years, Paris and New Delhi have built a broad nuclear relations that includes civil nuclear energy, large-scale reactor project, research training, industrial cooperation, and more recently, discussion on small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. This makes the France-India partnership in particularly relevant case for understanding how nuclear cooperation can connect energy policy, technology, and foreign policy. One of the most visible examples is the Jaitapur nuclear power plant project in Maharashtra, which has been presented as a flagship project of France-India civil nuclear cooperation. At the same time, the project has also raised important questions about implementation, financing, regulation, liability, and local acceptance. More recently, nuclear cooperation has gained renewed attention in the broader context of India's long term energy ambitions. New Delhi aims to significantly expand its nuclear capacity by 2047, while France has presented itself as a key partner in supporting India's access to low carbon energy, including both large reactors and newer modular technologies. So, in this part, we will discuss how France India civil nuclear cooperation should be understood today, whether it's mainly about energy transition, whether it's also about industrial and technological cooperation, and how projects such as Jaitapur cooperation fit into India's broader nuclear strategy. So, my question to Digvijay is the France India nuclear partnership mainly about energy and climate policy, or does it also have a broader strategic and geopolitical meaning?
First of all, thank you, Aysenur, for having me here. Hello, everyone. My name is Digvijay Singh, and I am a research analyst at the Geostrata. And coming straight to your question, that is the India-France nuclear partnership mainly about energy and climate policy, or does it have a broader strategic angle as well? Now, if we read the recent or the evolving developments in these past 30, 40 years between India and France, we know that it's clearly the both. But the strategic layer obviously dominates, right? We have the energy and climate angle is a stated justification, but cooperation offers India with access to advanced tech, right? Energy diversification from Strait of Hormuz and other vulnerable sources of energy security and climate commitment support. Now, the partnership sits at a much wider architecture, right? We have joint naval operations and joint naval drills with France. We've had close defense cooperation with France, right? We've had just the deal of 114 Rafales for the Indian Air Force, right? And the Indian Navy as well, right? Now, France is giving India all of that stuff. And what India is providing is a clear-cut access to the IOR in the Indian Ocean region, right? We see that there's a convergence of both of these nations, Indo-Pacific maritime strategy in order to counter maritime piracy, expansionism from several nations. There's AI cooperation, right? We saw Mr. Modi visiting France for the G7, right? And we've had the Bharat Innovates Summit in Nice, right, this year as well. And there's clear-cut space cooperation, right? Now, nuclear cooperation functions as a trust maker, right, within France's strategic autonomy, right? We know that France has been a very vocal nation in the G7, in the advanced economies of the West, which has not always been following the standard of other nations, right? And its Indo-Pacific posture and India's diversification away from over-reliance on any single partner makes France a very close partner and collaborator for India in tech and its energy policy, right? And not to leave behind the geopolitical angle of it.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Gaurav. So, The Jaitapur nuclear power plant project has often been described as a flagship project of France-India civil nuclear cooperation. Why is Jaitapur so important and why it has been so difficult to implement?
Yeah, to answer this, Jaitapur has been one of the foundational pillars for India-France partnership. It is equivalent to India-Russia partnership when in terms of Kudankulam we can view it. But Jaitapur, to give you a perspective, it's also, if it becomes operational, it will be one of the largest reactors in the world. Around 10 gigawatt, 9900 megawatts would be produced from it, which is around 9.9 GW, which is 1/10 of the Indian target of 100 gigawatt. So it's as big as possible. However, it was announced almost 15 years back, 2011. That time, so there are a lot of issues, a lot of perspectives which we can view how Jaitapur is slow on track but continuing, because it was announced let's say a decade and a half back, when Europe was under that anti-nuclear or anti, let's say, the reactors were closing down. The nuclear energy was not the flavor of the season, and it was not in the climate goals as well. Post the strategic shifts of International Climate Summit in 2015, and now nuclear being included in the climate goals as well as a key energy source in the climate commitment of world, this cooperation will now increase in the pace of it. Why it was so important back then and why it is so important now? Because the scale with which the power it will be producing. Also, this was a test for India's reality of cooperation with a nation beyond its all the existing powers. Like, it was also an example of India's trust on its Western partners. India trusted Russia with Kudankulam, and India-Russia relations have been a successful benchmark for countries. But this was India's openness to the West, if we exclude Russia from it. So it was a test for the partnership for India-France, but it was announced when it was not the flavor of the season. Why it has been so difficult to implement? With all these barriers, with all these issues of nuclear not being the flavor of the season, there were protests around it. There were various groups which came up, which regularly comes up in Europe now also. The parties which protest the people's progress, but then with the different barriers each day reducing and cooperation increasing each day, now it looks like that we will be having a Jaitapur functional in less than a decade at least. But since the scale was so big, so there is also a technical dimension to it. Now we are moving towards smaller module reactors. Now we are moving towards small reactors. Not the large ones are not the flavor of the season. So Jaitapur bore the brunt of everything. It bore the brunt of why it was announced. It was announced a way back when India's nuclear progress was dull. It was not the part of commitment goals. The Western ideology was the flavor of West's politics was also not anti-nuclear comparatively. Now all the key engines which will help Jaitapur nuclear plant to become one of the biggest in the world and one of the largest in India are in place. So as such, the cooperation is on track. But again, till the power is produced, till we get a unit of electricity from it, it's a slow progress, but it's a progress which is the pace in the nuclear sector. So with the recent initiatives and recent alignment of India, France on the key issues for this also, we expect it to become functional soon. But difficulties will exist for Jaitapur because of the scale with which it comes to. And this, so it's also in Mumbai, it's also in Maharashtra, which is one of the key places for India's economic spine. So having a key base for all these near to our economic capital Mumbai, of all these industries, data centers are maximum in Mumbai, to give you a perspective. So this state will also, and this plant will also set up the tone how the economics of our western region and our economic capital comes in with the stable electricity that it can provide. So things are appearing to become fruitful soon, but they are at a very slow pace.
Thank you so much. Moving to the next question. India aims to reach 100 gigawatts of nuclear power capacity by 2047. What role could France realistically play in helping India achieve this target, and is it realistic? My question is to Digvijay.
Right now, when we speak of the 100 gigawatt of nuclear power capacity by 2047, we often miss the fact that 100 gigawatt currently sounds like huge number, but when we would be in 2047, India's energy demand and energy needs would also increase tenfold, right, or rather 11-fold. Currently, we are at around 9 gigawatts, right, and as Gaurav also said that once Jaitapur is at its complete operational capacity, it would generate 1/10 that is currently 9.9 gigawatts of nuclear power for India, right? Which is a great progress and great development for an anti-nuclear kind of environment that India has been seeing. But now, ever since India signed the civil nuclear agreement with France in 2008, the two nations have been collaborating in the civil nuclear sector in at a depth that is second only to, I think, the India-US nuclear cooperation, right? Now, when we speak of France's realistic role in advancing this, or rather in helping the Indian nuclear sector, it's not primarily the monetary aspect. It has to be the technology, the training, right, and the joint venture participation between the two nations, right? Because somewhere I read that Jaitapur would need around $20 billion for it for development and to like completing it completely. So that's there, and no nation can put in that much of an amount in a single project. That has to come from the public, that has to come from the private sector. Now, more so when we speak of France's contribution, its most consistent and frictionless input has been institutional, right? There's an education and training agreement which exists between India's Global Center for Nuclear Energy Partnership, the Department of Atomic Energy, France's National Institute for Nuclear Energy and Technology, and the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission, which is similar to India's Department of Atomic Energy, right? Now, we also have an EDF's proposal for training civil nuclear engineers and technicians from India for development in EPR projects, right? Plus, there's also this internship facilitation program under the Skill India initiative. Now, one simple thing is that we could make tens of projects, we could develop tens of nuclear power plants, but if we don't have the qualified engineers, the qualified technicians, we won't really be able to, eat the fruit of that effort, right? That is where France comes in. France has the HR capacity, France has the technological depth in its private industries, right? And which is, I think, more central than simply funding the project or simply executing the project, because the infrastructure is there, but do you have people who are qualified enough to make good use of it, right? So I think that would be France's one of the major roles in helping India achieve this target. And yes, I think it is realistic. It's not whims and fancies, and India can achieve it. But yeah, we have to look at the execution angle of it.
Thank you so much. Do you, Gaurav, want to add something?
Not to this, not to this. He covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Okay. Then, after looking at France-India civil nuclear partnership, it is useful to broaden the discussion to the European Union. The European Union-India nuclear relationship has a different profile. It is less centered on large reactor projects or industrial cooperation, and more focused on peaceful nuclear research, scientific collaboration, and nuclear governance. A key reference point is the agreement signed in 2020 between India's Department of Atomic Energy and Euratom, which focuses on research and development cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. This fits within a wider framework of European Union India scientific and technological cooperation. India's association with European and international scientific institutions, including CERN, also shows that nuclear related cooperation with Europe is not only about energy production, but also about research, advanced science, and knowledge exchange. At the same time, the European Union India relationship also has a political and security dimension. The recent European Union India Security and Defense Partnership places non-proliferation and disarmament among the areas of dialogue, together with maritime security, cyberspace, counterterrorism, and the Indo-Pacific. This suggests that nuclear issues are part of a broader conversation about security, multilateralism, and strategic cooperation. However, the European Union's role remains different from the French one. While France is involved in concrete bilateral nuclear projects with India, the European Union seems to provide a wider framework based on peaceful research, regulatory dialogue, non-proliferation, and diplomatic engagement. So, my question to Gaurav is, how does France-India nuclear cooperation differ from the broader European Union-India nuclear relationship, which seems more focused on research and non-proliferation dialogue?
So when we are talking about these two, so we are talking about an institutional bloc, which EU is, and we are talking about an individual nation, which France is. It's one of the G7 nations also. EU as such, it's a bloc. So with EU comes institution, normative norms, as well as these people-to-people exchanges, non-proliferation, regulatory dialogue, diplomatic engagement. Institution cooperation happens with this. However, when we see India and France, it's a G2G and B2G relations. So for, let's say, bringing in money into EU would be everyone's responsibility. But bringing in, let's say, revenue and increasing cooperation with a large country like India, it's France imperative, and it is India's energy imperative also. So France India nuclear cooperation handles as the G2G cooperation as well as the strategic alignment between these two. EU itself is divided amongst its members also. So as such, EU can't have that, let's say, vendor or client relationship or an industrial relationship with India compared to, let's say, an individual country in EU. So EU is more about diplomatic engagement, regularly dialogue, which is the policy part of things. To cement it with the business part of things, individual EU countries should be taking the route which France and India nuclear cooperation takes. There is alignment at the knowledge sharing level. There is alignment at the industries level. There is alignment on the G2 government to government levels. Also, there is alignment on the new economies and the startup let's say economics of startup too. We have seen large Indian industries interacting with young French startups. Also, French companies equally interested in investing in India with their technologies. So EU should model the France-India nuclear cooperation. Apart from it, with EU, that comes with an institution is these dialogues which cement people-to-people cooperation, which cement research, joint research together. So EU can lead that. Individual countries who are part of the EU can mimic what India and France nuclear cooperation looks like. So if you see the sector holistically, the nuclear cooperation with the Western partners and EU particularly in this, EU is also undergoing through crisis. There is a rise in energy prices. There is an active war going on EU's borders also. So there is an Strait of Hormuz crisis, which is also a crisis for everyone in the region as well. So EU needs to diversify its expansion into, so EU as a bloc has similar less population than India. So EU also needs India as much as India needs EU for the research and, let's say, dialogue, non-proliferation treaty kind of things, or let's say international law normative things. EU is a good model for India to follow. But for giving that impetus for business, economics, and technology transfer, individual EU countries can mimic France and India's nuclear cooperation, which is also one of the successful partnerships of the last decade. It is not just for nuclear, it is also at solar. The International Solar Alliance has France and India as partners, as founding partners. So these partnerships are not just one-off event or one sector event. It's a broader strategic alignment that EU should focus upon too. Or who provides that to EU? There is a block of other countries who are not as democratically sound as India, not growing as much as India, also not having the population and economics as India also. So to bring in the second phase of or the third phase of development for EU, it should begin from the Indian expertise. Also with US, let's say, closing its borders soon for the Indian talent, EU can be one of the pathways for the Indian talent to perform. And nuclear cooperation with the France proves that there is a demand for Indian talent across, and there is a demand for Indian brain across the Western partners. So this would be one of the starting points for a broader engagement, more research, more regulatory dialogue, and more diplomatic engagement between an institutional bloc of EU and India.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for your answer. Now, my next question is for Digvijay. So, how should we understand the European Union and India's security and defense partnership? It is like a symbolic political framework, or does it make a real strategic shift in the relations of these two blocs?
Yeah, Aysenur, that's a very important question that we have to look into right now. If we look into the current and the evolving developments carefully, it's actually both. Right. In January of 2026, we signed alongside the FTA the Security and Defense Partnership with the European Union, which is the European Union's first comprehensive framework for security and defense cooperation. Right. It expands on numerous domains such as maritime security, defense industry, cyber threats, space, and counter-terror operations and counter-terror strategies. Right. It has planned an annual dialogue and a planned, security of information agreement for classified exchanges. Now, I would say that that's a real deal, right? And it's way more than symbolism. That's way more than political symbolism and way more than political signaling, right? Against anyone, right? The test of this partnership lies in its execution. The Indian defense sector still relies on its public sector undertakings, that is the government companies, right? While the European defense sector is private led. Now, technology transfer and IP issues will need some sorting because we know how difficult that is when we are into a B2G agreements on such critical defense and tech agreements, right? Now, the partnership has also emerged partly as a reaction to disruption in the transatlantic relations under the Trump administration and partly from independent strategic convention on either side, right? Because New Delhi and Brussels, both of them saw that things are not going well as they used to in the last 10 years, 20 years. They might have to shift to more deeper cooperation in order to reduce their dependence, be it economic, be it political, be it maritime, be it defense, on our conventional vendors or conventional partners, right? Now, for India, it's also an important partnership for diversification of its defense cooperation, right? We know that under the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, India has been shifting away from foreign dependence in the defense sector, but still most of our legacy weaponry still uses Soviet era or the Russian equipment in it, right? Now, it's like more like an expression from India and the European Union in keeping pace with the evolving developments in the world. Right, things will not be the same, and I think both of these blocks or both of these partners have understood that right quite well. And what is needed is more convergence of thought, more convergence of ideology, and more convergence of mutual interest, which will drive this strategic shift in the second half or the second quarter of the 21st century, right?
Thank you so much. My next question is to Gaurav. Given that India is not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, how does the European Union engage with India on nuclear governance without creating normative contradictions?
That's a very good and a great question also, because normative contradiction in the last decade has been, I think, maximum in the EU itself, within itself. Is it the route that it wants to take to decarbonize? It was a normative contradiction a while back also. Now it's the route of going to wars or handling or reconstruction of member nations. Is it also a normative contradiction now? So all of these normative contradictions are, I think, on the EU side more now. But again, India's nuclear sector has been one of the beacons for the safety and the transparency that it carries. We've got the NSG waiver in 2008. We have been regularly part of the IAEA norms and safeguards. Apart from it, our regulator, which is AERB, Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, has been one of the best regulators across the world. So all of these issues, best in, like, it has been awarded by the IAEA also. So all these tests which set up NPT and a responsible nuclear power, we have fulfilled it without signing it. We have fulfilled all of these. We have let the energy, let the sector use for peaceful purposes. We have not. We are having the nuclear power and the nuclear sector under a civilian government control. There is no involvement as such of any other part or wing of the government there. So our normative contradiction should not be there. It's not an avoidance strategy, but it's an alignment strategy between EU and India. Norms change. Currently, the norms at India and EU should be how secure and peaceful it should be. A peaceful world helps India's rise more, and India's rise more helps the world's rise and decarbonization goals more. So if EU believes in fulfilling the climate commitments, EU believes in having peaceful use of energy, having safeguards, sustainable safeguards for nuclear energy. There is no other nation where it can find all these things, and who has been responsible and aligns with EU's worldview as well. It is India. So NPT should not be a barrier on that. And considering the NSG waiver, so US and France nuclear cooperation rests on that waiver. This waiver can also, like, EU-India relations for the nuclear sector can also rest on that waiver, because there's an active G7 EU member following the same relations. So the normative contradiction now doesn't exist as such, because norms are the same, is to prosper their economies, help reduce the scars of current wars, as well as the barriers of energy security. So the best norm nowadays is to help India grow, and EU can lead that.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for your explanation. To conclude, nuclear cooperation helps us understand much more than India's energy strategy. It also shows that India is positioning itself in a changing international order. For India, nuclear energy is linked to energy security, economic growth, decarbonization, and strategic autonomy. For Western partners, especially France and the European Union, cooperation with India is also a way to build trust with a major Indo-Pacific actor. So, before closing, I would like to move to the broader geopolitical picture. Digvijay, my question is for you. How do other countries in the Indo-Pacific region perceive India's civilian nuclear expansion given the dual-use sensitivities of nuclear technology?
Right. So, Aysenur, if we leave out two certain nations from the Indo-Pacific, there is no other nation in the entire region which has any problems with India's civil nuclear or uh, uh, nuclear targets or nuclear expansion, right? More so, it has been read more like a stabilizing model in the region rather than a proliferation risk, right? Now, Southeast Asian nations, numerous of them like Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, which have been accelerating their own civil nuclear program, and they want to expand their programs in the 2030s up till 2040. For them, India's 2 decade long safety and like track record of safeguarded, transparent, and uh, a people centric or a welfare centric civil nuclear program offers a credible template, right? With which comes without strings, of course, right? Now, with civil nuclear agreements, which now span 18 countries, India is positioned less as a dual use outlier and more as the region's one of the most experienced anchor partners. Someone who neighbors can co-develop standards with, who can provide them fuel cycle expertise, right, and SMR technology, right. So you know how important SMR has been for the Indian government, right, in the recent past, as Gaurav would also agree. Now we have to enforce collective energy security rather than threatening it. Like the nations know it. We are not threatening the region that we would expand to a certain extent that we can't handle it. It's more like India has been putting its money on a technology which is more efficient, which can be better handled with India right at its top, and which would provide the power that the world needs, that India needs, and that global South needs.
Thank you so much. My last question is for Gaurav. If we look at the next decade, should we expect India-West nuclear cooperation to become more strategic, more industrial, or mainly symbolic?
I think this is no say. It will be all. So to begin with, it will be symbolic also. It will be symbolic at the places like who are there. These institutional partnerships will be symbolic. But with symbolic, we get strategic and industrial also. So all of these three things we want, like from India's perspective, we can expect that India will be growing. The next decade belongs to the Indians as well also. So the next decade we see all these three levels. It has to be strategic, industrial, and symbolic. But the pace of it is the key here. So if it has to be symbolic, it should percolate to not just being symbolic, but also in the norms, also in the people to people exchanges, also in the knowledge exchange programs, also in reducing the barriers for the peoples to move, the colleges to get established, the colleges to have a regular interaction amongst the people. The knowledge sharing part should be there too. For industries, there are us, we are the startup capital of the world. So it has to be industrial and it has to be strategic with the worldview that Indian and West nuclear cooperation rests on stable and peaceful world. So as such, on the last question, you said dual use of sensitivities of nuclear technology. The only sensitivity in Indian nuclear cooperation with the West is to have a strategic worldview, which they have, to have an industrial growth path, which they have, to have the symbolic unison in approach, which they currently have. All of these needs to be executed at a rapid pace. Pace has been one of the missing components of India's cooperation with the West, considering, let's say, a decade lost in the pace also. India has made its changes. There is a new act in place, Shanti Act. India is willing to open up more cooperation as well as more opportunities for the companies around the world in Indian nuclear space. There is a regulator who will be facilitating. There is an active body in terms of Department of the Government, Department of Atomic Energy, who is regularly willing to come on board and help all these partners to come on board and have to contribute and to contribute and looks towards contribution in Indian economics and energy sovereignty and sharing the nuclear energy component in India's overall energy metrics. But in the last decade, it should be pace. Whatever we are thinking, it should not be one Jaitapur, it should be 10 Jaitapurs, let's say a smaller versions as SMRs, but it has to be rapid. So changes are happening both within the Indian ecosystem for nuclear energy, within its expansion towards and broadening of the space. Europe should do its part, the West should do its part, and India is regularly doing its part. There is, as such, no contradiction on the worldview. They symbolically share. There is also no contradiction among the climate goals, which they symbolically share. They have a unison on that. Same needs to be rapid for the next decade. Because if we lose out on next decade, we are 2 decades behind. So, and let's say if Indian per capita remains at 3,000 or 4,000 or even $5,000 for the next decade, we have missed the bus. We will miss the bus on AI, we'll miss the bus on climate goals, we'll miss the bus on these data centers and everything. But we should not be missing it. EU has that opportunity to make good economics out of this too. With the technology transfer, with the people exchange. Also, they have the potential to take in the Indians who want to work in this sector. So it's all opportunities are opening up, but we should be like pouncing on them with more great pace now.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for your answer. This was the last question. I want to thank Gaurav and Digvijay for their contribution for the first episode of the podcast of Mondo Internazionale in collaboration with Geostrata on India and nuclear cooperation. Thank you for your contribution, and if you want to add something.
Thank you for having us. It was good. I think this is the symbolic part that we need to do more with more, let's say, more institution in India. I think Geostrata is one of the best platforms to do it. It is one of the youngest platforms also. So the next decade, the youngsters have more important role. So all of these things align with the same, that regular interaction, trust, and the symbolism to benefit all the people around the globe. I think thank you to Digvijay also for facilitating this, and thank you, Aysenur. It has been a pleasure.
Mine also.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Aysenur, for doing this. And Gaurav, you've been a very gracious guest, right? And please keep attending with us, and we'll have more podcasts on such issues which are of importance to us and to the global south and our European partners as well. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Totally behind you. Thank you.